and welcome to another episode of Quarantine Cuisine. This morning we are going to solve your bread problems. I tried to order online groceries, everybody's out of bread, there's bread that doesn't fit my family's needs, and I'm just stuck. Some of us don't have a bread maker, some of us aren't bread makers, and so what do? Well, we have a great recipe for you today for beer bread. It's simple, it's easy, it's quick, and it's yummy. All you need is 1 bottle of beer. Maybe 2, one for the cook. Let's get cooking. I have all my ingredients assembled and I'm ready to make the bread. I have in this bowl 3 cups of all-purpose flour. The recipe and other recipes that I have used all call for self-rising flour. The difference between self-rising flour and all-purpose flour is the self-rising flour has the leavening agents incorporated into the flour. This does not, and so we will add those leavening agents, and I'll show you how to substitute that. I would suggest that you use whatever flour you might have in your cupboard, whether it be wheat, whether it be rye, whether it be just all-purpose flour, whatever kind of flour you like and that you use routinely. Could be gluten-free. I haven't tried this with almond flour, but I bet it'd work. Anyway, experiment, just use what you have. The leavening agent that is put into self-rising flour is a combination of salt and baking powder. And the combination is 1/3 teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of baking powder to every cup of flour. So I have 3 cups of flour here, so I'm going to have 3 teaspoons of baking powder and a teaspoon of salt. All that out. This is really the only difference in your self-rising flour. So I would incorporate that as much as you can. I have a little small bowl, but just mix it up well. The beauty of the self-rising flour is it's already mixed up. But don't go order it. Don't rush out and get it. For this bread, again, Quarantine Cuisine, we're trying to do with what we've got. Next, we're going to add the sugar. I have looked at lots of recipes. They have varying amounts of sugar, and it really is a personal preference. I prefer to have my bread not too sweet, generally, unless I'm adding fruit or something sweet to it. So I go down the middle. This recipe that I'm using today calls for 1 to 4 tablespoons of sugar. I'm going to use 2. So I have 2 tablespoons of sugar in here. And I'm going to incorporate those ingredients as well. Now, when you're making bread or any cake-like product, brownies, etc., always mix up your drying ingredients first and then add your liquid. That way, the dry ingredients, you won't have parts of it concentrated in one area. Next, we're going to add the butter. And we have divided the butter. And again, it's a tablespoon of butter for each cup of flour. So this is 3 tablespoons of butter. We're going to incorporate that. And that's not going to mix up great because there just isn't enough of it. But do the best you can. And then to that, we're going to add 1 12-ounce portion of beer. It calls for 1.5 cups, which by weight, 12 ounces kind of is going to work. Anyway, don't leave some of the beer behind. Now, if you want to be specific and just add 1.5 cups, you can have the last swig. Otherwise, just pour the whole beer in. And I pour it in batches. I don't do it all at once, partially because I've got a really small bowl, but I start to incorporate it, otherwise I'm going to make a mess, which is not unusual for me in the kitchen, but we're going to try to do this as mess-less as possible. I'm going to add the rest of the beer. I would recommend you bring the beer to room temperature. I think it will work better in your recipe. I think it will raise better. I think it will make a big difference. If all you've got is cold beer, then you can work with it. If you just decide, oh, gee, I don't have bread for fill in the blank, then just go with it. Now we're going to stir this up. It's going to be a little lumpy. It's not going to be smooth and beautiful like your grandmother's bread. But again, this is a quick bread. It's not as particular, if you will, as a rolled loaf of bread. I'm gonna move my dish out so I can get a little elbow grease in here. Make sure you incorporate all of the flour. It tends to separate down at the bottom. If you've decided it's a little too thick, you can add part of the beer from the beer that you're drinking, or you could add some water. Got my water here, and add just a little bit so I can get the bottom bits of the flour incorporated. One thing about working with dough that people forget, whether it's cookies, whether it's bread, whatever kind of dough you're working with, the more you beat it, the tougher it's going to be. So you don't want to work this too much. You don't want to spend too much time, because otherwise you're going to have tough bread, and you don't want that. This looks pretty good. It's a little elastic, and I think it'll go into our bowl really nicely. I have greased a loaf pan. You can put this in a round bowl that's oven safe. I would have done it in this bowl. However, you would have to grease the bowl. So you do need to have 2 bowls to do this recipe, because you need the grease so it'll come out. We're gonna toss this in here. And make sure it's kind of smoothed out. Make it even. You don't want, obviously don't want it to be really deep on one side and thin on the other. The last step for this bread is you take a tablespoon of butter, melted, and you can either drizzle it over the top, or you can take a pastry brush. I kind of use a combination. Obviously you want the butter everywhere, and I'm not very good at pouring it evenly, so use a bit of a combination if you have a pastry brush. If not, just swing it. Again, this is going to provide a nice buttery rich crust for the top and the sides of the bread, and it will give it just that nice little bit of finish for your bread. Next, we're going to put it in a 375 degree oven for approximately 45 to 50 minutes, or until a toothpick comes out clean into about half of the top of the bread. So I can't wait. I'm going to get my jam out and get ready for some yummy bread. So we pulled our bread out of the oven a few minutes ago, so it's cool to the touch. You may need to loosen it a little bit with a knife, but it should pop out pretty easily. We're going to flip it out and then let it cool completely. I have done that. I've let it cool a little while, so I can go ahead and cut this. It's nice and brown on top. We cooked it for about 45 minutes. We're going to use a serrated knife to cut through. And look how lovely that is. Your family's going to love it. It's light and airy, and you have made your first loaf of bread. For this recipe and others, go to brewedandboostfood.com. Like us on Facebook and Instagram. Like us and subscribe on YouTube. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.